Have you ever heard of a king who couldn't write his own name, yet became one of the most influential rulers in history? A man who united most of Western and Central Europe, and was crowned Emperor of the Romans. A title not used in the West for over 300 years. This is the story of Charlemagne, a figure so legendary he's often called the father of Europe. His story begins, not in a grand palace, but on the move, as was common for the Frankish court. While the exact date is debated, we traditionally mark his birth on April 2nd, 742. He was the eldest son of Pepin the Short, who would soon become the first Carolingian king. From a young age, Charles was then known was immersed in the world of politics, warfare, and Frankish tradition. When his father Pepin died on September 24, 768, the kingdom was divided, as was the custom, between Charles and his younger brother, Carl. The two brothers didn't exactly see eye to eye. Their relationship was tense, filled with rivalry and mistrust. Imagine trying to rule a kingdom while your own brother is your biggest competitor. This fragile balance of power was a constant source of instability, threatening to tear the Frankish realm apart before it had a chance to truly flourish. The stage was set for a dramatic power struggle. What would happen if one brother decided the kingdom wasn't big enough for the both of them? The fate of a burgeoning empire hung precariously in the balance. But then, something unexpected happened. On December 4, 771, Charlemagne died suddenly. Whose like that at the age of 29, Charles was left as the sole ruler of the Franks. The divided kingdom was now won, and the era of Charlemagne had truly begun. With absolute power now in his hands, Charlemagne didn't waste a moment. He was a man of boundless energy and ambition. His reign would become a nearly continuous series of military campaigns, expanding his territory and his influence in every direction. One of his first major conflicts was in Italy. At the request of the Pope, Charlemagne marched against the Lombards in 773. After a successful siege of their capital, Pavia, he declared himself King of the Lombards in 774, adding northern Italy to his growing domain. But his longest and most brutal war was against the Saxons, a collection of pagan tribes in what is now northern Germany. This conflict, known as the Saxon Wars, began in 772 and would last for over 3 decades. It was a clash of cultures, religions, and wills. Charlemagne was determined not just to conquer the Saxons, but to convert them to Christianity, a goal he pursued with relentless and often harsh methods. He saw himself as a soldier of Christ, and the expansion of his kingdom went hand in hand with the expansion of the church. His military reach didn't stop there. He campaigned in the south, creating a buffer zone against the Umayyad Muslims in Spain. One famous event from this campaign in 778, the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass, though a military defeat, would later be immortalized in the epic poem, The Song of Roland, one of the oldest surviving major works of French literature. He also pushed east, conquering Bavaria in 788, and defeating the Avars, in modern-day Hungary and Austria, seizing their immense treasure. Through these campaigns, Charlemagne forged a vast empire, larger than any seen in Europe since the fall of Rome. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a unifier, bringing diverse peoples under a single rule. But Charlemagne's vision extended far beyond the battlefield. He understood that to rule a vast and diverse empire, he needed more than just a strong army. He needed a functioning administration, a common culture, and a system of education. This led to what historians call the Carolingian Renaissance, a period of renewed emphasis on scholarship, literature, art, and architecture. Remember how I said he might not have been able to write? Well, he deeply valued learning and surrounded himself with the brightest minds of his time. Like the English scholar Alcuin of York, he established a palace school at his capital in Aachen, and ordered monasteries and cathedrals to set up schools of their own, to educate boys from all social classes, not just the nobility. This revival of learning had a very practical purpose. Charlemagne needed literate priests and officials to run his empire. A key part of this reform was the standardization of writing. Scholars developed a new script called Carolingian manuscript. It was clear, uniform, and much easier to read than the scripts that came before it. This new script was it allowed for the faster and more accurate copying of books, especially the Bible and other religious texts. Thanks to this innovation, many classical Latin texts from ancient Rome were preserved for future generations, texts that might otherwise have been lost to history forever. So, while Charlemagne himself struggled with writing, he was responsible for one of the most important developments in its history. His efforts to standardize and reform weren't limited to education. He also reformed the economy, moving away from the gold standard and creating a new silver-based currency system to Libre, so, and denier, which would become the basis for many European currencies for centuries. He also tried to standardize weights and measures throughout his empire. He was a micromanager in the best sense of the word, issuing detailed instructions on everything from the administration of justice to the proper management of his royal estates. By the year 800, Charlemagne was the undisputed master of Western Europe. His power and prestige were immense, rivaling that of the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople. And then came the moment that would forever cement his legacy. On Christmas Day, the 25th of December, in the year 800, Charlemagne was in Rome, praying at the altar in the old St. Peter's Basilica. As he rose from prayer, Pope Leo III placed a crown on his head and declared him Emperor of the Romans. The crowd in the basilica erupted, acclaiming him as Augustus. This coronation was a monumental event. It was a symbolic revival of the Western Roman Empire, and a declaration of independence from the Eastern Byzantine Empire. It established a new political order in Europe, one where the power of the emperor and the authority of the pope were deeply intertwined. This new title, Holy Roman Emperor, signified that Charlemagne was not just a Frankish king, but the secular leader of Christendom, a divinely appointed protector of the faith. It was the absolute peak of his power and influence. He had started as a king of the Franks, and was now, in theory, the successor to the Caesars of ancient Rome. In his later years, Charlemagne focused on consolidating his vast empire. He established his permanent capital at Aachen, in Modena, Germany, a central location from which he could govern. There, he built a magnificent palace complex, including his famous Palatine Chapel, a masterpiece of Carolingian architecture, inspired by churches in Ravenna and Constantinople. It was a symbol of his imperial power and his devotion to God. He continued to govern with a hands-on approach, sending out royal inspectors known as missi dominci, to ensure his orders were being followed throughout the realm and that justice was administered fairly. He was a ruler who was deeply involved in the details of his empire's governance until the very end. But even emperors are mortal. In 813, knowing his health was failing, Charlemagne summoned his only surviving legitimate son, Louis the Pious, to Aachen. There, in a grand ceremony, he himself placed the imperial crown on Louis's head, making him co-emperor and sole heir. A few months later, in the winter of 814, Charlemagne fell ill with a fever. After a short illness, he died on the 28th of January, 814, at the age of around 72. He was buried on the same day in his cathedral at Aachen. Charlemagne's death marked the end of an era. While his empire would eventually fragment under his successors, his legacy was profound and enduring. He had expanded the realm of Christianity, fostered a revival of learning and culture, and laid the foundations for the political and social structures of medieval Europe. The very idea of Europe as a distinct cultural and political entity owes a great deal to this one remarkable man. He was a warrior, a reformer, a statesman, and an emperor whose impact is still felt more than 1200 years later. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey back in time interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the figures who shaped our world. Let us know in the comments which historical figure you'd like to see next. See you in the next video.